go back to the failed policies of the past, or will we continue to move forward?
Who can you trust to help you and your family to get ahead?
Who can you count on to fight for you?
Who will represent you? Who will be true to who we are?
If they want a real change, we are the party for a real change.
What matters most is that we vote for what we believe in and vote for what we want.
It looks like Canadians haven't exactly answered any of those questions yet, nor is it clear who exactly they want to vote for. We've passed the midway point of election 2019. Halfway in, there is little movement in the polls, but there are 3 more debates ahead, including tonight's French language debate on TVA. So what's mattered so far in campaign 2019, and what will it take to shake up or firm up the final outcome? Let's take those questions to former premiers. Tonight on the Premiers League, Christy Clark was BC's premier from 2011 to 2017. She's now senior advisor with Bennett Jones and joins us by Skype from Chicago. In Toronto, Bob Rae, Premier of Ontario from 1990 to 95. He also served as former interim leader of the Federal Liberal Party. He's the host of the Political Stripes podcast, Mr. Rae is alongside Brian Gallant, who led New Brunswick from 2014 to 2018. He's now special advisor to the president of Ryerson on innovation, cybersecurity, and law. And if you're wondering where the Prairie representation is, we had hoped Alison Redford could also join the panel, but she couldn't make it at the last minute because of a delayed flight. She will be with us on next week's Premiers League. Hi, everybody. Nice to see you.
Good to be with you.
Nice to see you, Vashi.
Ms. Clark, I'm going to start with you. Do you think that this campaign, why do you think this campaign so far has failed to move the dial in one direction or another?
I think there's 2 things. I mean, there's all the unexpected. I mean, the blackface revelations, I think, really changed the tone of it and the trajectory, and a whole bunch of people had to reconsider their strategy in that, I think. But I also think that it's a weird election because there is no party in the middle. Canadians like to and have traditionally rewarded parties, whether they were progressive conservative parties or liberal parties, that were in the middle ideologically. But the Conservatives have presented themselves as a party increasingly moving to the right with what sort of sounds like an anti-climate change or hostility toward the climate change issue. And then the Liberals have completely abandoned the middle. I mean, it would be very easy to confuse them with the NDP of yesteryear. So I think that's part of the problem. People don't know who to vote for because most Canadians want to vote for a center party, and it doesn't seem like there's one out there at the moment.
Do you think that's a fair point, Mr. Rae?
No, not really, but, that's okay. Christy's entitled to her opinion. I certainly think the Tories have become more extreme, and I mean, based on my Twitter feed, there's a lot of they're certainly appealing to an angry base.
Oh no! Don't base anything on your Twitter feed.
But I compare this election a lot as you put a great big tablespoon into a jar of peanut butter and you put it in your mouth and you try to talk. I mean, this is really an election that's stuck right now, and I think we're waiting for it to break and waiting for something to emerge in which people will say, yeah, this is where I'm going to go. I think that it's also a very regional election where the splits will be different in different parts of the country and will have a different effect, which is why when you look at a national poll, it doesn't really tell you a whole lot about where these things are going to go. I think the election tonight, the debate tonight will tell us a lot about where things might go in Quebec. We're certainly seeing in the polls the movement, Liberals are doing well, and the Bloc is coming up in a way that we haven't seen in a long time in Quebec. So that will affect, 4-party races make it pretty hard to predict exactly what's going to happen in one constituency or another. So I still think it's going to be a very lively night on election night. The election may be sort of grinding its teeth, but the election night's going to be really fascinating.
Yeah, the stagnant campaign leads to a very exciting election night if it remains that way. Mr. Gallant, if this election campaign so far is this giant jar of peanut butter, if it is stuck, why do you think it is that way?
I asked Bob offline that he had to make that reference and then make the sound that he made with peanut butter in his mouth, emulating that. But
I'll do that at the end.
Yeah,
I await it eagerly. Yes.
Yeah, so Vashi, I think your preamble is right. A few things come to mind. I mean, there's no big foreign policy issue that is clouding and is the umbrella of this campaign, as we've seen in previous elections over the last few decades. There's also no need, or at least not a sentiment, that people have to really focus on just the economy. The economy is doing very well, and frankly, the Trudeau government had great record numbers in many ways and great economic growth over their mandate. So there's not this one overarching issue that's capturing people's attention. And that means that there's really not the one issue that people can use, the political parties can use as a wedge issue and sort of force a binary choice. So I agree with your preamble. It's quiet. It's people seem to not really know where they want to go with this. If you look at the polls, I agree with Bob. I mean, it's early to be looking at them. The orange crush only started off at about this point when we saw Layton take off in 2011. So I think it's very clear that people are not sure what they want to have happen. And the polls sort of statistically show within the margins that everybody's sort of at their base. Everybody's just sort of with their political parties. They're sort of looking what's going to happen. People, maybe the Greens would be the only ones that have a bit of a change with doubling their support, which won't really translate in that many more seats. So I think over the next few weeks, you're going to see the war rooms, as they're often called, really try to think about how they can grab attention, try to make this a binary choice between the two major parties. And I'm sure the other third parties will be asking voters to park their vote with them in this election, because clearly nobody has really sparked their interest yet.
Ms. Clark, do you see the potential for anything to move the dial? And if so, what would it be?
Banshee, if you're talking to me, I'm getting a pretty bad feed.
Okay, we'll try to hook you up better. We'll try to fix that technical difficulty, and I'll just ask Mr. Ray the same question. If there is the potential for this campaign to be unstuck, what might propel that?
I think Christy Clark had the peanut butter in her mouth.
Yeah.
What I heard was the distinct
It sounded
sound
remarkably like it, yes.
of I think crunchy variety. Anyway, no, seriously, I actually, Brian talked about the economy. Look, the stock market today started getting very edgy. If you talk to economists, there's a lot of concern globally about what's going to happen. So I think there is people are going to be looking at, who is likely to provide the clearest kind of leadership that will keep the ship fairly steady and on a better track and on a good track. I think the trouble with this kind of mood in the public is that it often tends to lead so-called war rooms to make mistakes, to kind of say, well, let's go hard on this, or let's do something else that's going to really be exciting. And people have just got to, I think, understand that the voters have not, in many cases, they've indicated their preferences, but they've not yet firmly made up their minds. And I don't think that's going to happen until the last week of the campaign, when I think we're going to begin to see in different parts of the country people deciding where do they want to go, and what kind of leadership do they want it to have? Do they prefer it to be more conservative? I mean, more akin to what's happened in the UK and what's happened in the US, or do they still want to see Canada as a progressive force? And if they do they want to plump for one of the Greens or the NDP? Or are they going to stick with the Liberals and, in fact, come back to the Liberals because that's really where they want to go, and they're worried about what some of the alternatives might be? I think that's likely how it's going to unfold. But look, it's 3 weeks to go. Anything can happen. Anything can happen, and it's important for people to remember that.
If there is something that moves the dial, what might it be, do you think?
I don't think anything's going to move the dial, particularly until we get to the very end, and then you're going to see all three parties, main parties, laying on the ugly, mean, horrible. I mean, it's going to be the opposite of sunny ways. If you can, it's going to be a tough couple of days in the last bit of the run. I'm not sure that matters, because I actually think what's at stake here is that the federal Liberals, that Justin in the last election got a ton of young turnout. Those younger voters are very turned off right now. And who knows, if they don't show up to the polls, and you look at the numbers from Rose Deer Research in Vancouver, Justin Trudeau got one of the smallest pluralities on volume of any prime minister elected in recent history. It was very narrow, it was 7%. So he's got to have that turnout for the Liberals. And if that turnout doesn't come out for him, I think we're going to see the thing clinched on election night. It's going to be the voter turnout that's going to ultimately decide who wins, who loses, and who holds the balance of power, which I think is the most likely scenario.
Mr. Gallant, you've just been on the inside of a campaign pretty recently. Mr. Ray made the point that in these situations, a lot of times the war rooms will decide to go hard on something or take a different tack. What do you think will be going on behind the scenes if, in fact, things stay the way they are over the next few weeks?
Well, first off, let me just say that I think that things could change very rapidly. Bob made a good point. I mean, something could just externally happen. I mean, we saw the economy basically start its recession in 2008 during the middle of the campaign. We had a picture in 2015 that influenced heavily foreign policy and immigration. So I think it's really clear that with a 3-week window, anything can happen. Now, with that said, I think everybody's going to be trying to push something to happen because nobody really likes where they are right now. So I think you're going to see, the NDP really try to swing for the fences. They're going to say to themselves they have nothing to lose at this point, so might as well just try to throw some things out there and see what sticks. You're going to see the Greens really try to push the narrative that that people should be fed up with the sort of traditional parties and that they're an alternative. The Bloc Québécois, I think, will be trying to tell Quebecers that they are a good place to park their votes if they aren't really inspired by either the Liberals or the Conservatives. Now, meanwhile, the two traditional parties, I think two things could maybe start to move the needle a little bit. Affordability. I think we heard in the preamble that you all prepared. We heard Scheer talking about affordability. We've heard over the mandate of the Trudeau government a lot done for the middle class and those working hard to join it. That could certainly, if something happened there or if somebody put out a policy that would be or say something that would be inspiring, I think that could start to pivot things. And to Christy's point, I agree. I think that voter turnout should be a concern for a lot of the parties, especially the Liberals right now. They saw a lot of young people come out to vote for them in 2015. So if the young people start to pay attention, if they're one of the first cohorts to start to pay attention in this campaign, things like climate change will obviously be at the forefront, and that could potentially start to shift things. You could argue in the favor of the Liberals and potentially the Green Party. But at the same time, I have to reiterate that Christy's right. I mean, voter turnout, I would think for the Liberal campaign right now would be one of the things that they're looking at because they need people to turn out if they're going to be able to get the support they had in 2015 from the youth.
Mr. Ray, what do you think, and I mean, you've been in the position, what is the, sorry, just a question to Mr. Ray, what is the mindset of the people who are leading these parties, the party leaders, who find themselves in this situation where nothing they're saying at this point, the policies they're putting forward, nothing is really punching through? What does that do to their mindset, if anything?
Well, I think that's one of the things you go into training for. I mean, you can't let a campaign which I've been in campaigns where you knew you were going to lose from the start. How do you get through every day and just make it sound as if it's victory's just around the corner? I've given a lot of those speeches. You have to know how to do that, and so you can't let the side down by indicating any lack of resilience or lack of optimism. And I still think the positive thing, and listening to Brian's litany of each of the parties, I think what keeps them going is there's everything to play for. The Liberals can form a government. The Conservatives could form a government. The NDP could do better than people think. The Greens could make a breakthrough. The Bloc could do very well in Quebec. For each of the parties, there's a tremendous amount at stake. I think one of the last questions that voters are going to be asking themselves is, do we want to have an effective government or not? Or are we concerned about what the ultimate result might look like based on all the demands of all the different parties? And I think that's going to be obviously one of the strongest pitches that the Liberals will make is, look, if you're actually interested in a green agenda that's nothing's perfect, don't compare us to the Almighty, compare us to the alternative. And if the alternative is Mr. Scheer, then please, come back and stick with us. I still think that's an appeal that can have some effect. How much, we'll just have to see.
Ms. Clark, you want to jump in?
I think there's a problem with that argument this time around. I mean, it usually does work. Hold your nose and vote for me. But the issue is it's so hard to get younger people to vote with their heads and not their hearts. So when you're depending on young people to turn up and vote for you, and Justin Trudeau had this in spades in the last election. He doesn't have that now. And that strategic voting is really the preserve of people who have mortgages and cynicism and, engage in mainstream media a lot more than they do on social media. I don't think it's going to be easy for the Liberals to scare people into voting for them, because I don't think young people vote with their heads. They vote all with their heart.
Well, I'm not talking about scaring people. You don't have to scare people to get people to sort of look, here are the choices, how do you want to go? And I actually think that having seen a significant turnout from younger people before, I think it's more likely that the turnout may actually be better than some people think.
Why do you have that sense? You mean among young people? You have that sense? Why is that?
Well, because they voted. I mean, if you look at people who were 18 and 19 and voted, and now they're 22, 23, 24, are they more? We all know the thing about voting is if you do it once, you're more likely to do it again. Yeah. And that's one of the reasons why expanding the electorate was such a good thing when it happened in the last election.
And if I may, Vashi, I think I would agree with Christy and Bob, but I would say that the debates are going to be very interesting. Yeah, exactly.
Wait, I think they're saying different things. Yeah,
trying to compromise here. No, but I agree in the sense that it's going to be important, I think, over the debates for Trudeau to really try to demonstrate that there are major differences between him and Scheer. And the more that he can do that, I think, to Bob's point, I think that will start to have people that are parking their votes potentially, or debating on parking their votes, start to say, well, wait a second, maybe it is a binary choice between two people that can form the government, and that may have them go to Trudeau. But where I do agree with Christy, it's not going to be as easy as last time, because the incumbent was Stephen Harper, and that was certainly the first judgment that every Canadian was having was, do I want Stephen Harper to remain as Prime Minister? And when that question was no for I think several, well, obviously the majority of Canadians, then they said, okay, well, who's the best choice to make sure that happens? So I again, agree with both a little bit, but I think it's going to be very important in the debates for Trudeau to find a way for Scheer to really shine a light on some of the policies that would drive some of those voters back to the Liberals.
Okay, I have to leave it there, but thank you very much to all three of you. We'll check in next week again. Thanks to our Premiers League, Bob Ray, Christy Clark, and Brian Gallant.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.